So this is the second of 3 recordings that I'm going to do for Chapter 4 from They Say, I Say, and this particular portion of the video is going to focus in on the yes pattern. So we're on page 59 going into page 60, and it talks about the section agreeing but with a difference. And so one of the things that Graf and Berkenstein talk about is that it'd be really, really boring to just echo the ideas that you agree with. And I think that most of you have probably experienced something similar in a classroom discussion where you've witnessed one person in the classroom discussion say something intelligent, and then another person just raises their hand and says, like, what she said. I don't need to add anything because what she said was awesome. Her ideas, Kelsey, Susie, Emily, their ideas. And that's frustrating because you know that the person is not really doing their own work. They're just relying on the other person. So when you write a paper, you can't just literally say yes, because if all you say is yes, you have no paper to write. You have to say yes, and then you have to add a contribution that's different in some way to the original. So by difference, we don't mean disagreeing. We just mean bring something new to the conversation, bring something new to the table. And so Graf and Berkenstein say that some people avoid writing yes papers just as much as other people avoid writing no papers because they don't want to seem like a copycat. They don't want to seem like somebody else's views are more important to them. But basically, all that you have to do is offer in something new to the conversation. So you have a couple of options here, and those options come up in this paragraph right here. I've got them listed in the notes. First of all, you can point out something that's been unnoticed by other people. So maybe, you've paid attention to certain research that this other paper hasn't talked about, so you feel like it's worthy of being brought up into the conversation. Your second option is the idea of adding your personal experience, or if you've witnessed somebody else's personal experience, you can use them as an example. I always tell my AP Lang students that this is the money shot right here for your FRQs, because your personal experience is valuable, and in a timed writing situation, when you can't go out and research anything else, it's really the best thing that you have. So if you do agree with somebody else and you're in a timed writing situation, turning to your own personal experience for reasons why you agree is something valuable and different that you're offering and putting on the table. The last option they have is giving an accessible translation of the original ideas if they seem really hard for the average reader to understand. This is probably going to happen most often in college level papers. It could be that you're in a philosophy class and you've been asked to read something really complex, like a translation of a pre-AD article, some like a philosopher that's been translated from ancient Greece. And maybe the translation itself was written in the 1800s. And so it's really hard. It's really dense language. So maybe you want to explain that you agree with this philosopher, but then try to put it in words that the modern writer can understand. So you'll see them do that in some of these template patterns. So we can go into the template patterns here right now. So just like the last group of templates, we want to make sure that you are comfortable recognizing the language that holds the yes. So what is your evidence that this writer is about to agree with somebody? Well, in this case, it's super easy because they're literally using the word agree. Okay? And then what's going to further the discussion is this writer talking about their own experience. Okay? In the next pattern, you're saying that somebody is right. Well, if you think they're right, then that's a yes. It's also going to show recent studies that you think, well, maybe that person doesn't even know because this research has happened so recently. The yes language in this sentence is calling somebody's ideas useful. If you think it's useful, then you feel like that's a positive, right? And so any language that indicates that you're positive or in support of it is going to indicate a yes. In this case, if you're shedding light on a difficult problem, then what that means is you're saying, okay, your theory works not just here, but your theory would work in another situation too. So you're offering them a new way to think about it. This is probably the most obscure yes language, is this fourth pattern. But it says those unfamiliar with this school of thought, so people who've never heard of this before, may be interested to know that it basically boils down to blank. So you're giving an endorsement of it because you think that people might be interested in these ideas. So I would say this is probably the yes language. And this idea of boiling something down is definitely the language that indicates you're about to give an accessible translation to that idea. You're going to boil it down into words that other people can understand. Again, we have that conversation about whether or not agreeing with people makes you a copycat. And Graff and Birkenstein are saying no. Just because you say yes, it doesn't mean that you're unoriginal. It just gives you an opportunity to expand the conversation. They also remind you, and this gets now down here into part 4, that agreeing with one group is oftentimes going to make you then, whether you say it or not, in a position that's totally against a different group. So keep in mind that just because you're choosing to say yes to your particular they group, there might be some other voice out there to which you would inherently say no. And so they've got an example of that here with Carol Gilligan's writing. So they say basically, she's in support of, let's read it together. These findings join in a growing convergence of evidence across the human sciences leading to a revolutionary shift in consciousness. If cooperation, typically associated with altruism and self-sacrifice, sets off the same signals of delight as pleasures commonly associated with hedonism and self-indulgence, if the opposition between selfish and selfless, self versus relationship, biologically makes no sense, then a new paradigm is necessary to reframe the very terms of the conversation. So basically she's saying that she agrees with the people that believe that this doesn't make sense, but then ultimately that means that you have to do something new. And if you have to do something new, then that means that you are in opposition to the old. Okay? So they introduced 2 templates here that I think are kind of fascinating. So it says when you're agreeing with one group, you might be inherently disagreeing with another group. So you could do that in this template. So here's where your yes language is. You're saying yes to group 1, but you're saying no to a second group. Oh, that's my alarm. If you're saying yes to this group, here's your yes language, you're calling them right, then reassessing something that other people believe means that you're saying no to a different group. And so this is kind of a sophisticated way to look at a yes paper. You're not saying yes and no to the same group. You're saying yes to group 1 and no to group 2. So it's a way to pull in more than one idea at once. Okay? So this is going to end our section on yes language. As far as the frequency of how often you'll find yes papers, it's kind of hit and miss depending upon the topic. Like I said before, Americans in newspapers and magazines inherently love disagreeing with each other, but there are times when we champion other people's causes and we have a really big woohoo for somebody. So that's one of the tests that I'll ask you to think about. Do you feel like the writer, if you think a paper is a yes paper, do you feel them going woohoo? And if the answer is yeah, then it's probably a yes. All right? You can move on here in a moment to the third video, which will be about the okay but.